Hello friend, it's Pat Sloan here and we are wrapping up Home Is. There we go. There's everything but our last block, which is the sewing room. We can't have a house, we can't have a home without a sewing space. So here's the block. Ta-da! I am so excited. So excited to have the last block. It will go down here. You just put it up here for you to see together. So there are all of mine together. I do need to put a strip on the left of the bow ties and then between the sewing block and the bow ties. So there's two more strips and I can put all of this together. Now I have a few things I want to show you on the sewing block, the sewing room block, which has to do with using the light pad, because there are fun ways to make it easier for yourself. So let's take a look at that. Light boxes have come a long way. They're no longer these great big thick things or these contraptions you have to put together. There are fabulous ultra thin, look at that, multiple different sizes of these light pads, and they're easy to store, they're easy to use. So I'm going to show you two ways that they can be used for helping you with this sewing room block. I've got it plugged in, so let's come on down. Come on down. So if I want to turn it on, now we get the brightness. And you first put your pattern onto the box, onto the light pad. And you can either do it to trace the shapes onto the fusible, and we're going to choose it to do the embroidery. Definitely need it for the embroidery. I generally can see this without a light pad when I trace, but you may need a light pad. So that just depends on you and how you work. So I am going to take some washi tape, here, cute ones with anchors, and tape the pattern down, because you don't want it to shift while you're tracing, because that would be a bit miserable to have it move and then you have to line everything up again. So just two pieces of tape, and the washi tape can go right on here. You're not going to leave it on forever. It's also it's like using painter's tape. They come up, they don't leave a residue. So if I am going to trace, like I've already traced the scissors, so you can see that, but if I want to trace the spool, then here is the spool, and you trace whatever utensil you want. I have pencils, I wouldn't trace, you don't want that. I'll talk about that in a minute. Pencils, some sort of pen, Sharpie pen. So just take the pencil and I would trace the shape, because I can see it super easy. And then this piece would be ready for doing the applique shape. Now, before we go ahead and trace it onto the block, so here it is prior to the embroidery being on here. So I'm going to next be tracing right on the fabric. So I have a few things to say about that and what we use to trace on the fabric. I have a piece of my Morrison Park, which is the same fabric that is here. And when you look at the pattern, part of the thread I have going out there onto that border, which means I kind of need to see that marking utensil on this fabric. So I want to test all of the things that I might write with. So here is just a regular pencil, and if I'm writing on here, I'm probably going to see that well enough to do the embroidery. This is not a major embroidery project. We just have here's the line, right? So you can see it on the white a lot better. But it's not a big long embroidery project. This is fairly short, so you're not going to be worried too much. Here's the Sharpie. I personally use the Sharpies a lot. This one is the ultra fine, which means it has a really fine point. I have a couple of tips for Sharpies. Let me just make the line. See, I can see that line on there really well. Lots of Sharpie lines. The thing you don't want to do, let me just flip it over to the back so I can show you. The thing you don't want to do with a Sharpie is hold it and then go. That's not going to do it for me. Hold it and go. So do you see how where it was holding in the tip, it sucked the ink and made that little blob on the end? That's what happens if you hold and go. What I tend to do is just lightly go like this. And I rarely get those little dots. Now with the embroidery, it's going to be pretty easy. You're not going to, you're going to cover up anything that's not too big of a dot if it just does it just a tiny bit. These here are the Frixion pens that will, with heat, go away. So that's why you don't want to write it on here. Let me pull you out. You don't want to do the Frixions when you're tracing this because you have to heat this to get it onto your fabric and then all your lines go away. Ask me how I know. Friend did that for me. She wrote, don't do that. Now if I'm going to just do it in the embroidery, that's great because I could heat set it to remove the line then, which actually, it's a chemical, so it doesn't actually ever totally go away from your fabric, but it pretty much goes away. There we go. So there's the line. Now this is a little bit thicker line, so I personally don't use this one just because the line's a little bit thicker and I need to be sure that my embroidery is covering it. If it doesn't totally cover it, I would need to heat set it to have it go away. Use the Sharpie. So I'm going to take the Sharpie, and that'll be my go-to pen. It's what I usually use. And we're going to take the actual block, and I'm going to draw on it so I know where to do my embroidery. Get you in close here. I could also do the pencil. That would be my other choice, is to draw with the pencil. If you follow looking at the pattern, now the thing is with the shapes, I have the spool, split out so that you can be tracing these pieces individually. So there's a little bit of a visual that comes through. You really want to line up just the center part of the spool to the center part of the spool on here, because I have this connected to where I did it on my original drawing. Put your spool over top, and then I want to be sure. I want to be sure what's going on. Like the little tail of this comes down and stays in that center, square. So I want to be sure that that is still happening, and I can see it right here. Okay, now it's there, and I will take my Sharpie and I will just lightly trace. And even if I don't get the whole thing, I just want to do it super light, because that is how. All right, so I've already traced here. So now I'm going to go out and trace over on these lines. Do you see it? This line comes like this. So I am tracing just right on top and then out here softly to this little curve, and there we go. Now when I remove the light box from behind there, you can see I have my tracing, my embroidery line. And I will be working with the Aurifil 12 weight. This is a navy 12 weight, a navy color, because blue and white, we're going to do navy, and this will show up nicely on all the fabric. It'll show up out here, and I will do a stem stitch with this guy, and so to give it a little bit of thickness, coming all the way around and over. Now if you like to do machine embroidery, you could do that. You could do sort of thread sketching, just take over it with your thread a couple of times as a straight stitch, and then you don't have to do any handwork on this. I do want to show you how I thread this 12 weight. The 12 weight is thicker. It's like one of the pearl cottons, and if I'm using a needle which has an eye that's big enough to do this, if your eye is too small, the needle, it won't work. But I just loosely put the thread over my finger. See, here's that first finger, and I lay the eye on top of the thread, and then I just sort of squish it and pull it, and it starts coming up through the hole, and there it's threaded. I'll do it again so you don't have to rewind. Let me unthread it. So I'm taking the thread over top of my finger. Let me just get the camera to focus. And then I'm taking the eye of the needle right on top, and just sort of pushing it a little bit back and forth until it pops through. Ta-da! There it is. And then you pull it. The light box, or the light pad, since they're so nice and thin now, these light pads are just wonderful. They truly help you out with your work, particularly if you're going to do some embroidery. And for a lot of people, they do like that extra crispness that it helps with tracing the applique shapes. So let's take a look at some other options you can put in the center of this block for those who might want to do that. If you don't want to do the applique, you can of course do another 6-inch block. There's the cute little house that we did. That's a 6-inch block. You could do a 6-inch friendship star. You could just find some sewing fabric that will go with what you're doing and put it in there. But I also have a few other thoughts for you that you can do for the center. If you have either of my Splendid Sampler books, which are all 6-inch finished blocks, there are sewing blocks in here. In the Splendid Sampler 1, first just let me show you the one page. If you want a sewing machine, there is my sewing machine from the Splendid Sampler 1 book. And there are other cute things. I brought over my sampler that I have. Let me hold it up. There's the little pin cushion, that's mine from the book. There are, just other, well, there's a friendship star block right there. But there are other cute blocks. There was another one I wanted to show you. If you want a different kind of house, there is a house there. We have embroidery. Whoops. So here's a sewing hand embroidery in Splendid Sampler 1. I mean, tons and tons of blocks. Ooh, there's a heart. You could put a heart on your quilt from the Splendid Sampler 1. The Splendid Sampler 2 also has a few fun blocks. Another whole sewing room in Splendid Sampler 2, which, see all my notes, because I'm in the, still have blocks to do. But here is the sewing room, which I think, whoops, I'm dropping stuff, I think is fabulous. That was from Lynette. But there is also, no, I'm sorry, that one's mine. Sorry, that one's mine. Lynette did one too. So there's another sewing room block in here. But there's also a spool, and that was from Tammy. So there's a spool, you could do it either way. These are great references for 6.5-inch blocks. And this was in Splendid Sampler 2, which is also my embroidery. So if you wanted to put sew, or if you wanted to put your initials or some other date from that book, you can do that. And I have a link down below. While you're there, hit subscribe. But the link down below will send you over to where you can buy the Splendid Sampler books. Or, of course, just do what I gave you if you're doing applique. Or pick another 6.5-inch block. There's one coming, all the socialites have a 6.5-inch pattern with those, so you could pick any of those if one of those spoke to you. Also, I did misspoke the other day on the world peace. The papers that are in there, they are triangle on a roll. They're triangle on a roll papers. So these are what comes in the kit. There's lots of different names of things, and I got it messed up in my head. So that one's still 20% off, this kit, which has 2 different sizes and backing for the quilt, binding for the quilt, and the top. All right, my friend, it's time to wrap up this Home Is. Next Wednesday, I will talk about border options and what you might want to do if you want to make it add a border to it, which you don't have to do, but if you do, I'll give you some options on that. It's time to go sew, time to get this baby sewn up. I love you. Mwah. See you online.